Hey everyone, welcome back to Soul Spark Dating. Today we're diving into a topic that I think is incredibly important for anyone navigating the complex world of modern relationships. The red flags that we often miss or misinterpret, but that can have profound impacts on our emotional well-being and relationship success. The concept of red flags has become increasingly popular in dating conversations, but there's also a lot of confusion about what truly constitutes a warning sign versus what might just be a normal human imperfection or a growth opportunity. By the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer understanding of which warning signs truly matter, how to respond to them effectively, and how to avoid the common pitfall of becoming so focused on finding flaws that you miss genuine connection. I've spent years working with people on their relationship journeys, and I've seen patterns emerge around the warning signs that genuinely predict relationship difficulties versus those that are often overblown. I've also seen how transformative it can be when someone learns to navigate these waters with wisdom rather than fear. Whether you're currently dating, in a relationship that has some concerning elements, or taking time to reflect before your next connection. This information will help you make more conscious choices about who you invite into your life and how you respond to potentially problematic behaviors. #the red flag confusion. One of the most challenging aspects of modern dating is figuring out what actually constitutes a red flag. There's so much conflicting advice out there that it can leave you feeling completely confused about what to watch for and what to ignore. You hear things like, "He doesn't compliment you," major red flag, "He's withholding affection." But then someone else says, "He compliments you too much," definite red flag, "He's love-bombing you." Or how about, "She never asks questions about your life." Red flag, "She's self-absorbed." But then, she asks too many questions about your past. Red flag, "She's invasive and controlling." He's disrespectful to his parents. Red flag, "He's not emotionally mature." But also, he's too close with his mother. Red flag, "He's got dependency issues." She talks about her ex. Red flag, "She's not over them." But also, she never mentions any exes. Red flag, "She's hiding something." He wants to move quickly. Red flag, "He's rushing intimacy." But then, he wants to take things slow. Red flag, "He's emotionally unavailable." It's enough to make you feel like you're constantly walking through a minefield where any small misstep could indicate you're dating someone toxic or dangerous. This hypervigilance isn't healthy, and it's not actually helping us form meaningful connections. I recently received a message from a subscriber named Jessica who said, "I feel paralyzed on dates now. I'm so busy analyzing everything the person says and does that I can't even enjoy myself or be present. Last week I ended things with a guy because he didn't ask about my day until 15 minutes into our conversation." A dating coach I follow said, "That's a sign of narcissism, but honestly, he seemed really nervous, and I'm not even sure I gave him the chance to ask earlier. Am I taking this red flag thing too far?" Jessica's question highlights exactly what happens when we become overly focused on identifying potential problems. We lose the ability to connect naturally and judge situations in context. We forget that people are complex, multifaceted beings who can't be reduced to a checklist of behaviors. This doesn't mean we should ignore genuine warning signs. There are absolutely behaviors and patterns that should alert us to potential harm. But we need a more nuanced approach than the simplistic red flag hunting that has become so common in dating advice. #the problem with red flag hunting. When we approach dating as primarily a red flag hunting expedition, we create several problems for ourselves and for our potential relationships. First, we're not actually present with the person across from us. We're mentally checking boxes and evaluating them rather than genuinely connecting. Think about your most meaningful relationships and connections. Did they develop because you were carefully analyzing the other person's behavior, or because you were both fully present and engaged with each other? No one wants to feel like they're being constantly assessed and judged. And importantly, no one wants to be the person doing all that assessing either. It's exhausting and takes the joy out of getting to know someone. Dating should be an adventure of discovery, not an interrogation or investigation. Think about how it feels when you're trying to open up to someone, but you sense they're just waiting for you to say something wrong. That tension and guardedness makes authentic connection nearly impossible. When we're overly focused on finding flaws, we create exactly the kind of defensive dynamic that prevents vulnerability and intimacy. Second, this approach assumes perfect people exist. If your standard is someone without any red flags whatsoever, you're looking for someone who doesn't exist. We all have imperfections, past wounds, and areas where we're still growing. The question isn't whether someone has flaws, it's whether their particular combination of strengths and weaknesses is compatible with yours, and whether you both have the self-awareness and commitment to grow together. I once worked with a client named Michael, who had an extensive list of red flags he was watching for. His list included things like uses their phone during a date, showing lack of respect, talks about their ex not, over past relationships, arrives more than 5 minutes late, indicating poor time management and disrespect, and dozens more specific behaviors. After 6 months of dating and finding fault with everyone he met, he realized his list was actually preventing him from getting to know anyone deeply enough to see their full humanity. Third, red flag hunting can become a convenient way to avoid vulnerability. If you're always finding reasons to dismiss people before things get serious, you never have to risk real emotional exposure. Sometimes what we label as having high standards is actually fear of intimacy in disguise. I've seen this pattern repeatedly. Someone claims they just haven't met the right person, but upon deeper exploration, they're actually finding small reasons to reject everyone before genuine intimacy can develop. This is often unconscious, a self-protective mechanism that keeps relationships at a safe distance. Finally, excessive red flag focus creates a negative lens through which we view potential partners. When we're primarily looking for problems, we tend to find them, sometimes even manufacturing them where they don't exist. Psychology calls this confirmation bias. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs, and often overlook evidence that contradicts them. This isn't to say that we should ignore problematic behavior. Rather, it's about approaching new connections with balance, aware of potential concerns, but equally attuned to positive qualities and the context of behaviors. Hashtag, a different approach, presence and curiosity. What if instead of approaching new connections with a mental checklist of red flags, we approach them with genuine presence and curiosity? This doesn't mean ignoring concerning behavior. Rather, it means engaging with people as complex human beings, instead of as potential threats or disappointments. It means being fully present in the interaction, rather than mentally cataloging each statement or behavior. Presence allows us to experience the nuance of human connection, the energy between two people, the subtle cues of genuine interest or discomfort, the developing rhythm of conversation and interaction. These aspects of connection are often more revealing than any checklist could be, but they require our full attention to perceive. Curiosity invites us to wonder rather than conclude. When we observe something that doesn't immediately make sense or that triggers concern, curiosity leads us to explore rather than immediately judge. This creates space for understanding context, hearing the other person's perspective, and discovering the complexity behind behaviors. When you notice something that concerns you, unless it's truly egregious or dangerous, consider approaching it with curiosity rather than immediate judgment. What if, instead of immediately labeling something as a deal breaker, you got curious about it? For example, if someone makes a comment that seems insensitive, you might think to yourself, "That seemed off to me. I wonder where that came from. Is this a pattern, or was it a one-time misstep? How does this person respond when I express how their comment made me feel?" This approach turns potential red flags into what I call amber lights, signals to slow down, pay attention, and gather more information before deciding how to proceed. I once had a client named Sarah who was on a promising third date when her date Chris made a comment about his ex that sounded dismissive and slightly disrespectful. In the past, Sarah would have immediately categorized this as a red flag and ended things. But instead she got curious and said, "That comment about your ex caught my attention. Can you tell me more about that relationship and how it ended?" What followed was a thoughtful conversation where Chris shared that he had still been processing some hurt from that relationship, acknowledged that his comment was coming from a place of unresolved feelings, and expressed that he was working on speaking more respectfully even about difficult past relationships. This opened up a deeper conversation about their respective relationship histories and how they both wanted to grow. Had Sarah immediately labeled Chris's comment as a red flag, she would have missed the opportunity to witness his self-awareness, his willingness to be vulnerable about his growth edges, and his receptiveness to gentle feedback, all green flags that far outweighed the initial concerning comment. Hashtag communication, the ultimate test. One of the most revealing tests of relationship potential isn't about identifying red flags. It's about what happens when you communicate about something that concerns you. Let me share a personal story. Early in my current relationship, I noticed something that triggered my insecurity. Instead of approaching it constructively, I became defensive and distant. When my partner asked what was wrong, I initially deflected, then eventually expressed my concern in an accusatory way. Rather than becoming defensive in return or dismissing my feelings, my partner did something remarkable. They validated that feeling insecure is uncomfortable, acknowledged how my past experiences might be influencing my reaction, and then calmly explained the context I was missing. They followed this with reassurance, while also gently noting that the way I initially approached the situation made it difficult to have a productive conversation. That moment taught me something profound about both red flags and relationship potential. The real test isn't whether someone is perfect or never triggers our insecurities. It's how they respond when we express our concerns, and how willing they are to engage in difficult conversations. When you share something vulnerable and the other person responds with dismissal, contempt, or stonewalling, that's a genuine red flag. When they respond with openness, empathy, and a willingness to understand, even if they don't immediately agree, that's a green light. This is why communication is so crucial. Many things that initially seem like red flags can be clarified or addressed through open conversation. The ability to have these conversations, and how both people navigate them, tells you far more about relationship potential than any checklist ever could. Consider this scenario. You're dating someone new, and they cancel plans at the last minute. On the surface, this could be interpreted as a red flag, perhaps indicating lack of respect for your time or lack of genuine interest. But what happens next is much more revealing than the cancellation itself. Do they offer a genuine apology and explanation? Take responsibility for the impact on you? Suggest an alternative plan? Make efforts to ensure it doesn't become a pattern? Or do they offer only a vague excuse? Seem annoyed when you express disappointment? Make promises to reschedule but never follow through? Repeat the pattern of cancellation regularly. The first response turns a potentially concerning behavior into a moment of reassurance about the person's character and consideration. The second confirms that the initial concern was valid. Without the communication step, you might miss this crucial information. When we create relationships where open communication is encouraged and received with care, many potential issues can be resolved before they become actual problems. This doesn't mean ignoring red flags. It means having the courage to address concerns directly and paying close attention to how those concerns are received. Hashtag the fear of vulnerability. Let's talk about what's really happening beneath the surface when we become hyper-focused on finding red flags. Often, it's about fear. Specifically, the fear of being vulnerable and getting hurt. When I look back at times in my life when I was most rigid about deal breakers and quick to disqualify people, they were usually periods when I was protecting myself from past hurts. If someone had previously betrayed my trust by lying, I became hyper-vigilant about any hint of dishonesty. If I'd been with someone who dismissed my feelings, I was quick to interpret any sign of emotional unavailability as a reason to run. This is natural self-protection, but it can become a prison that prevents new connections. The greatest paradox of love is that we must be willing to risk being hurt in order to experience deep connection. Many of us have had experiences where we've shared something vulnerable only to have it used against us or dismissed. I once shared my deepest insecurities with a partner, and they responded by saying they found my vulnerability unattractive. That kind of experience can shut us down completely. The natural response is to think, I'm never going to open up like that again. But the problem wasn't the vulnerability itself. It was sharing it with someone who wasn't capable of holding it with care. For many men especially, this becomes a core wound. They learn early that showing vulnerability is risky, that it might lead to rejection or being seen as weak. So they develop a protective shell, acting out through anger or withdrawal rather than acknowledging fear or pain. This isn't just a personal issue, it's reinforced by cultural messages about masculinity that equate strength with emotional stoicism. But here's the truth. Real courage isn't about never showing fear or weakness. It's about being willing to show up authentically despite the risks. The most powerful connections happen when we allow ourselves to be fully seen, not just our strengths and accomplishments, but our fears, insecurities, and struggles. When we find someone who can hold space for all of who we are, who doesn't use our vulnerability against us or find it unattractive, but instead sees it as a sign of courage and humanity, that's when transformation becomes possible. I worked with a client named James who had spent decades building emotional walls after a high school girlfriend had mocked him for crying. In his 40s, after multiple failed relationships, he took the risk of showing vulnerability with a new partner, explaining his fears around emotional expression. Her response, "Thank you for trusting me with this. Your ability to be vulnerable shows strength, not weakness," was healing in a way that no amount of self-protection could ever be. Our fears around vulnerability drive many of our dating behaviors, including excessive red flag vigilance. When we recognize this dynamic, we can begin to distinguish between legitimate concerns about someone's character and our own fear-based reactions. #the red flags that really matter. While I believe we need to be careful about labeling everything as a red flag, there are certainly patterns of behavior that should command our serious attention. These aren't about preferences or minor incompatibilities. They're about fundamental issues that affect emotional safety and relationship health. Here are the red flags that truly matter. #1. Disrespect for boundaries. How someone responds to your boundaries tells you everything about how they'll treat you in a relationship. If they push against reasonable limits, make you feel guilty for having boundaries, or ignore them altogether, this indicates a fundamental lack of respect that will only worsen over time. Healthy boundaries are essential for any relationship. They're not walls that keep people out, but rather clarifications that help people know how to treat us with respect. When someone consistently disregards your boundaries, they're communicating that their desires are more important than your comfort or autonomy. Pay attention to small boundary violations early on. They often predict larger ones later. For example, if you say you're not comfortable discussing a certain topic yet, and they continue to bring it up, they're showing you that their desire for information overrides your comfort. That pattern will repeat in other contexts. Boundary violations can be subtle. They might look like continuing physical touch after you've indicated you want to slow down, pressuring you to spend time together when you've expressed needing space, showing up uninvited after you've said you're busy, sharing personal information about you that you ask them to keep private, demanding explanations for decisions you've made about your own life. A person who respects boundaries might feel disappointed when a boundary limits what they want, but they honor it anyway because they value your autonomy and comfort. They understand that healthy boundaries actually strengthen connection rather than threaten it. #2. Inability to take responsibility. We all make mistakes, but there's a world of difference between someone who can acknowledge their missteps and someone who habitually blames others or makes excuses. Watch for phrases like "you made me do it," "if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have reacted this way," or "that's just how I am. You need to accept it." These indicate an unwillingness to take responsibility for their own behavior and growth. This pattern is particularly concerning because relationships require constant adjustment and compromise. Someone who can't acknowledge when they've made a mistake will be unable to grow with you. The inability to take responsibility often manifests as turning discussions about their behavior into accusations about yours, portraying themselves as the victim when their actions hurt others, using past experiences as justification for current harmful behavior, making grand apologies without actually changing behavior, expecting praise for doing the bare minimum in addressing a problem they created. By contrast, someone who takes responsibility might say things like, "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way, regardless of how frustrated I felt," or "I see how my actions affected you, and I'm going to work on that." They focus on what they can change rather than what they can blame. #seg. 3. Consistent emotional volatility. While everyone has bad days and moments of strong emotion, consistent emotional instability is a serious red flag. This includes dramatic mood swings that leave you walking on eggshells, disproportionate anger responses to minor issues, using emotional outbursts to control situations or conversations, emotional reactions that seem designed to punish you or make you feel guilty. These patterns don't improve with time unless the person recognizes them as problems and actively works to develop emotional regulation skills. Emotional volatility creates an environment of unpredictability and stress. You never know which version of the person you'll encounter, which makes it impossible to feel secure in the relationship. This chronic stress has real effects on mental and physical health over time. It's important to distinguish between someone experiencing a difficult emotional period, perhaps due to grief, life transitions, or mental health challenges they're actively addressing, and someone whose emotional volatility is their baseline way of relating. The former can be navigated with support and patience. The latter is unlikely to change without significant intervention and motivation from the person themselves. #4. Controlling behaviors. Control can be subtle at first, often disguised as care or concern. Watch for monitoring your whereabouts or communications, isolating you from friends or family, making decisions for you without consultation, criticism of your appearance, interests or friendships, financial control or monitoring that exceeds reasonable partnership agreements. Controlling behaviors almost always escalate rather than improve, and they reflect a fundamental belief that you need to be managed rather than respected as an autonomous individual. One of the most insidious aspects of controlling behavior is how easily it's justified. "I just worry about you," or "I'm trying to help you make better choices," or "I'm more experienced in this area," can sound reasonable on the surface, but these justifications mask an underlying belief that the controller's judgment should override your autonomy. Control frequently begins in areas where the person can claim special expertise or concern. A partner might start by criticizing your driving, then your food choices for health reasons, then your spending habits for financial security, until eventually they're controlling aspects of your life that have no rational justification. The antidote to control is respect for autonomy, a genuine belief that even if someone makes choices you wouldn't make, they have the right to direct their own life according to their values and judgment. #5. Chronic dishonesty. Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship, and chronic dishonesty makes trust impossible. This includes obvious lies, but also more subtle forms of dishonesty like consistently misrepresenting themselves, making promises they don't keep, telling different stories to different people, concealing significant information that would affect your decisions, creating false narratives where they're always the victim or hero. Someone who shows patterns of dishonesty early in a relationship is showing you who they are. Believe them. Dishonesty isn't just about major deceptions like infidelity or financial fraud. It's also about the small daily choices to misrepresent reality. Does this person exaggerate stories to make themselves look better? Do they conveniently forget commitments they've made? Do they tell white lies so frequently that you're never quite sure what's true? What makes chronic dishonesty particularly damaging is how it affects your own sense of reality. When someone consistently lies or misrepresents the truth, you begin to question your own perceptions and memories, a destabilizing experience that undermines your confidence and judgment. #6. Lack of empathy. Empathy, the ability to understand and care about another person's feelings, is essential for healthy relationships. Pay attention to how potential partners respond when you express hurt or disappointment. Others are suffering or struggling. Their actions have negative impacts on people. You need emotional support. Someone who consistently dismisses feelings, shows indifference to suffering, or seems unable to see situations from other perspectives will struggle to create emotional safety in a relationship. Lack of empathy might look like becoming impatient when you're upset, changing the subject when you express difficult feelings, making jokes at others' expense without regard for their feelings, intellectualizing emotional situations to avoid engaging with feelings, expecting you to get over hurt quickly. By contrast, empathetic responses include validating your feelings even when they don't share them, expressing genuine concern when you're struggling, and demonstrating awareness of how their actions affect you emotionally. Empathy doesn't mean someone always agrees with your perspective or that they never set boundaries around emotional support. But it does mean they care about your emotional experience and consider it valid and important. #7. Contempt and disrespect. Research by relationship experts has identified contempt as the single most destructive force in relationships. Contempt goes beyond criticism to convey disgust and superiority. It appears as eye-rolling, sneering or mocking, hostile humor or sarcasm at your expense, speaking to you with condescension, dismissing your thoughts or feelings as worthless, name-calling or derogatory language. Even occasional displays of contempt indicate a fundamental lack of respect that makes healthy connection impossible. The reason contempt is so damaging is that it communicates a fundamental devaluing of who you are as a person. While criticism attacks your behavior, you didn't do the dishes again, contempt attacks your character. You're such a slob, it's disgusting. This distinction is crucial. Contempt often begins subtly and may be brushed off as just teasing or their sense of humor. But over time, it erodes self-esteem and creates profound emotional harm. No amount of love or other positive qualities can compensate for persistent contempt in a relationship. #8. Patterns of past relationship chaos. While everyone has relationship history, pay attention to patterns in how someone describes their past relationships. Do they portray themselves as always the victim? Are all their exes crazy or toxic with no acknowledgement of their own contributions? Do they describe relationship patterns that consistently involve drama, betrayal, or extreme volatility? Have they had multiple restraining orders against them or from them? These patterns rarely change without significant self-awareness and usually therapeutic intervention. How someone talks about past relationships reveals a great deal about their level of self-awareness and capacity for growth. Someone with healthy relationship skills will generally acknowledge their own contributions to past relationship dynamics, express insights they've gained from previous experiences, and show evidence of having grown from difficulties. By contrast, someone who sees themselves as perpetually victimized by crazy partners is demonstrating an unwillingness to examine their role in relationship patterns. This lack of self-reflection predicts similar experiences in future relationships, including potentially yours. This isn't about judging someone for having a difficult relationship history. Many wonderful people have experienced challenging relationships. The red flag is not the history itself, but rather how the person has processed and learned from those experiences. #How to respond to potential red flags. When you notice something concerning, here are steps to take before immediately labeling it as a deal breaker. #1. Get curious instead of judgmental. Instead of immediately deciding what a behavior means, get curious about it. Ask questions that help you understand the context and pattern. I noticed specific behavior. Can you help me understand what was happening there? That comment surprised me. What were you thinking about when you said that? The way someone responds to these questions often tells you more than the original behavior itself. Curiosity creates space for understanding rather than immediate judgment. It allows you to gather more information before deciding what a behavior means. This doesn't mean ignoring your concerns or making excuses for problematic behavior. Rather, it means approaching the situation with a genuine desire to understand before drawing conclusions. When you approach potential concerns with curiosity, you also create an opportunity for the other person to become more self-aware. They might not have realized how their behavior came across, or might have been operating on autopilot based on past relationship patterns. Your curious questions can invite reflection that benefits both of you. #2. Communicate directly. Many potential issues can be resolved through direct, non-accusatory communication. Use I statements to express your concerns. I felt uncomfortable when specific situation happened. In future situations like that, I'd prefer alternative approach. This gives the other person an opportunity to understand your perspective and adjust their behavior if they're willing. Direct communication feels risky because it makes us vulnerable. We're expressing a need or boundary that could be dismissed or rejected. But without this step, we deny others the opportunity to meet our needs or respect our boundaries. We essentially decide for them that they wouldn't be willing or able to adjust, which may not be true. Effective direct communication addresses specific behaviors rather than character traits, expresses the impact of the behavior on you, makes clear requests rather than vague complaints, remains open to hearing the other person's perspective, focuses on the future rather than dwelling on the past. The response to your direct communication is invaluable information. Someone who becomes defensive, dismissive, or turns the conversation back on you is showing you something important about how they handle feedback. Someone who listens, seeks to understand, and shows genuine care for your feelings is demonstrating relationship skills that predict long-term success. #3. Look for patterns, not isolated incidents. Everyone has bad days and makes mistakes. What matters more than any single incident is whether you see a consistent pattern of concerning behavior. Is this an out-of-character moment during a stressful time, or is it part of a recurring pattern? Pattern recognition requires patience and observation over time. One of the most common dating mistakes is overreacting to isolated incidents while missing concerning patterns. Someone might be immediately written off for a single misstep, while someone else's consistent pattern of small boundary violations might be repeatedly excused. Patterns reveal character and relationship tendencies far more reliably than any single interaction. This is why taking time to know someone across different situations and contexts is so valuable. It allows patterns to emerge that might not be visible in limited interactions. When assessing patterns, consider frequency. How often does the concerning behavior occur? Consistency. Does it happen across different contexts or only in specific situations? Progression. Is the behavior staying the same, improving, or worsening over time? Response to feedback. When the issue is addressed, does the pattern change? This approach protects you from both prematurely dismissing promising connections and from making excuses for genuinely concerning patterns. #4. Pay attention to growth and accountability. The biggest differentiator between a red flag and a growth opportunity is how someone responds when an issue is raised. Do they listen openly or become defensive? Do they acknowledge impact even if their intention was different? Do they make meaningful changes or just offer empty apologies? Do they take responsibility or blame others' circumstances? Someone who demonstrates the capacity for growth and accountability may not be perfect, but they have the foundation for building a healthy relationship. Growth and accountability are particularly important because they indicate someone's capacity to navigate the inevitable challenges that arise in any long-term relationship. No one enters a relationship fully formed or without flaws. What matters is their willingness and ability to grow when issues are identified. Signs of genuine accountability include listening without interrupting when concerns are raised, asking questions to better understand your perspective, apologizing specifically for the impact of their actions, making concrete plans for how to handle similar situations differently, following through on commitments to change, being patient with the process of rebuilding trust if it's been damaged. By contrast, false accountability might look like apologizing but immediately making excuses, becoming emotional in ways that shift focus from your concern to their distress, making vague promises without specific changes, brief improvements that revert to previous patterns once the immediate issue has passed, expecting immediate forgiveness without earning it through changed behavior. #5. Trust your intuition, but examine it. Your intuition deserves respect, especially when it's alerting you to potential danger. At the same time, it's worth examining whether your reaction is coming from genuine concern about this specific person and situation, past wounds that might be triggering a heightened response, cultural conditioning about relationships or particular behaviors, fear of intimacy or vulnerability disguised as concern. This self-reflection helps ensure you're responding to the actual person in front of you, rather than to ghosts from your past or fears about the future. Our intuition is a powerful tool that processes information faster than our conscious mind can analyze it. When your intuition signals concern, it's worth paying attention. However, intuition can sometimes be influenced by past experiences in ways that create false alarms. For example, if you were betrayed by a partner who received frequent text messages, you might feel instinctively anxious when a new partner's phone buzzes often. This doesn't necessarily mean your new partner is untrustworthy. Your intuition may be responding to pattern similarity rather than actual danger. When your intuition signals concern, try this approach. 1. Acknowledge the feeling without immediate action. 2. Get curious about what specifically triggered the response. 3. Consider whether past experiences might be influencing your reaction. 4. Look for objective evidence that either supports or contradicts your intuitive response. 5. Decide on a course of action based on this more complete assessment. This balanced approach honors your intuition, while also ensuring that past wounds don't unnecessarily limit your current possibilities. #The power of a healing relationship. There's a common belief that you need to be fully healed before entering a relationship, but this sets an impossible standard. We're all works in progress, continuing to grow and heal throughout our lives. The truth is that the right relationship can be profoundly healing. When we find someone who responds to our wounded parts with compassion rather than judgment, who creates safety for our vulnerability rather than exploiting it, and who encourages our growth rather than keeping us small, that relationship becomes a powerful context for healing. This doesn't mean your partner is responsible for healing you. It means that a healthy relationship creates conditions where healing can naturally occur for both people. In my own relationship, there have been moments where old wounds have been triggered. Instead of this being evidence that I wasn't ready for a relationship, these moments became opportunities for deeper connection and healing when met with understanding. For example, there was a time when my partner said something that triggered my old fear of abandonment. In past relationships, I would have either withdrawn completely or lashed out defensively. But this time, after the initial reaction, I was able to say, when you said that, it triggered my fear that you'll leave when things get difficult, which comes from my past experience. Instead of dismissing this or making it about them, my partner responded with empathy. I can see why that would be scary given what you've experienced. I'm not going anywhere, and I appreciate you telling me how that affected you instead of shutting down. That exchange did more to heal my abandonment wound than years of being alone ever could have. It taught me that vulnerability, when met with care, leads to connection rather than rejection. The right relationship doesn't require you to be perfect or completely healed. It requires both people to be self-aware, committed to growth, and willing to hold space for each other's humanity, wounds, triggers, strengths, and all. This perspective shifts how we think about red flags as well. Instead of looking for someone with no wounds or triggers who doesn't exist, we look for someone who relates to their own and others' imperfections with awareness and compassion. Instead of expecting never to be triggered or hurt, we look for someone who can navigate difficult moments with respect and care. The healing potential of relationships is particularly powerful because many of our deepest wounds happened in relationship and can only fully heal in relationship. If you experienced rejection, abandonment, or invalidation from important people in your past, experiencing acceptance, commitment, and validation in a current relationship provides a corrective emotional experience that rewires your expectations and beliefs. This healing happens not through trying to fix each other, but through consistently showing up with presence, compassion, and respect, creating an environment where natural healing can occur for both people. #Conclusion. Beyond red flag hunting. As we conclude, I want to offer a different paradigm for approaching relationships than the red flag hunting mentality. What if, instead of primarily looking for reasons to disqualify someone, we approach new connections with this question: is this someone with whom I could create something beautiful, meaningful, and growth-promoting for both of us? This doesn't mean ignoring genuine warning signs. The red flags we discussed earlier matter tremendously. but it means not allowing hypervigilance about potential problems to overshadow the possibility of connection. It means recognizing that the most extraordinary relationships aren't those between two perfect people with no issues or triggers. They're between two people who are committed to understanding themselves and each other, who approach difficulties with compassion and curiosity rather than judgment and defense, and who see relationship as a context for mutual growth and healing. When we shift from "are they good enough" to "can we grow together," we open ourselves to deeper possibilities. We start looking not just for the absence of red flags, but for the presence of green ones, the capacity for honest, respectful communication, willingness to be vulnerable and authentic, consistent kindness even during disagreement, self-awareness, and a commitment to personal growth, the ability to accept influence and consider other perspectives, emotional accountability and regulation, mutual respect for boundaries and individuality. These qualities create the foundation for a relationship that doesn't just avoid harm but actively promotes healing and growth for both people. Ultimately, the goal isn't to find someone who never displays concerning behavior. That person doesn't exist. The goal is to find someone who has the awareness, compassion, and commitment to work through difficulties in ways that strengthen rather than damage the connection. Someone who acknowledges their imperfections and is actively working on growth rather than expecting you to accommodate harmful patterns. Someone who meets your vulnerability with care rather than exploitation. Someone who sees challenges as opportunities to deepen connection rather than reasons to disconnect. And perhaps most importantly, it means finding someone who helps you become more fully yourself rather than less, who expands your world rather than shrinks it, who supports your growth rather than feels threatened by it. Hashtag real-life examples, red flags in context. To make these concepts more concrete, I want to share some real-life examples of how potential red flags can be understood in context. These stories come from people I've worked with names and identifying details changed. Hashtag example 1, the late arriver. Maria had been on 3 dates with Alex, and each time, Alex was 15 to 20 minutes late. Maria had read that consistent lateness was a red flag indicating disrespect and lack of consideration. She was ready to end things, despite enjoying their time together once Alex arrived. Before making that decision, Maria decided to communicate directly. "I've noticed you've been late to each of our dates, and it makes me feel like my time isn't valuable to you. Is there something going on that I should understand?" Alex explained that he had ADHD that made time management challenging, showed Maria the multiple alarms he set on his phone before their dates, and expressed genuine remorse for the impact his lateness had on her. He also suggested meeting at places close to his work or home to reduce variables that could delay him. Maria appreciated his transparency and efforts to address the issue. On their next date, Alex arrived 5 minutes early. While he occasionally ran late in their future relationship, his consistent efforts to improve and his genuine care for Maria's feelings turned what could have been perceived as a red flag into an opportunity for understanding and accommodation of different needs. Hashtag example 2, the defensive communicator. Jason noticed that whenever he raised concerns with Chris would initially get defensive, sometimes raising his voice or changing the subject. Based on articles about healthy communication, Jason considered this a red flag indicating inability to handle feedback. Instead of immediately ending things, Jason pointed out the pattern during a calm moment. "I've noticed that when I bring up concerns, your first reaction seems to be getting defensive. It makes it hard for me to share things that are bothering me." Chris was quiet for a moment, then shared that in his family growing up, concerns were usually preludes to harsh criticism or punishment. His defensive reaction was a protective response based on that experience. He acknowledged that Jason wasn't his family and asked for patience as he worked on responding differently, perhaps with a pause before responding when difficult topics arose. Over time, with consistent safety in their conversations, Chris's defensive reactions decreased significantly. His willingness to examine the pattern and work on changing it turned a potential red flag into a healing opportunity for both of them. Hashtag example 3, the ex-mentioner. Tara noticed that her new partner Damon mentioned his ex-girlfriend frequently in conversations. She'd heard this was a classic red flag indicating he wasn't over his previous relationship. The mentions weren't romantic or comparative, but the frequency concerned her. When Tara brought this up, Damon was surprised. He hadn't realized how often he referenced his ex. He explained they had been together for 7 years and had shared many life experiences, making it difficult to talk about those years without mentioning her. However, he assured Tara that the relationship had been over emotionally long before it officially ended. Damon made a conscious effort to reduce these references, and Tara noticed the change immediately. His responsiveness to her concern and his self-awareness about how his behavior was affecting her new relationship demonstrated emotional intelligence that far outweighed the initial concerning pattern. Example 4. The non-reciprocal texter. Jordan was dating Riley, who often took hours or sometimes a full day to respond to text messages, while Jordan typically replied within minutes. Online dating advice suggested this was a red flag indicating lack of interest or possible involvement with other people. Rather than silently stewing or assuming the worst, Jordan mentioned feeling anxious about the delayed responses during their next date. Riley explained that they had a demanding job that often made immediate responses impossible, and also shared that they preferred phone calls to texting for meaningful conversations. They worked out a system: quick acknowledgement texts when immediate conversation wasn't possible, got your message, can't talk now but we'll call tonight, scheduled phone calls for deeper conversations, and an understanding that text response time wasn't a measure of interest or commitment. This solution addressed Jordan's need for communication while respecting Riley's work demands and communication preferences. What could have been interpreted as a red flag was simply a difference in communication styles that, once discussed, strengthened their connection. These examples illustrate an important point. Context and communication can transform many potential red flags into opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger connection. The exceptions are the serious red flags we discussed earlier. Patterns of disrespect, abuse, dishonesty, or control should never be ignored or rationalized away. Common misinterpretations, when it's not actually a red flag. Now let's explore some behaviors that are commonly misinterpreted as red flags, but might actually indicate something quite different. 1. Taking things slowly. In our culture of immediate gratification and accelerated relationships, someone who wants to take things slowly is often labeled as emotionally unavailable or uncommitted. But moving slowly can actually indicate thoughtfulness, desire for sustainability, or lessons learned from past relationship mistakes. Someone who takes time to build a foundation of friendship and understanding before rushing into romantic or physical intensity might be showing wisdom rather than hesitation. This pace allows genuine connection to develop without the blinding effect of early infatuation. The key distinction is whether the slow pace feels mutual and comfortable for both people, and whether the relationship is still progressing, even if gradually. If one person feels consistently held at arm's length, despite desiring greater closeness, that's a different situation that deserves attention. 2. Having close relationships with family. While unhealthy enmeshment with family is a legitimate concern, having close, supportive family relationships is actually a positive indicator for relationship success. Someone who maintains loving connections with family members often has learned valuable relationship skills like communication, compromise, and long-term commitment. The difference between healthy family closeness and problematic enmeshment lies in boundaries. Does the person make independent decisions while valuing family input? Can they prioritize your relationship when appropriate? Do family members respect the boundaries of your relationship? These questions help distinguish between healthy closeness and concerning dependence. 3. Being friends with exes. Conventional wisdom often labels friendship with exes as a definite red flag, but the ability to transition from a romantic relationship to a healthy friendship can actually indicate emotional maturity, strong communication skills, and the capacity to resolve conflict constructively. What matters is the nature of the friendship. Are there clear boundaries? Is there transparency about the communication? Does the friendship respect your current relationship? Someone who can maintain appropriate friendships with people from their past often brings valuable relationship skills to their present connection. Hashtag 4. Having periods of silence or needing space. In a culture of constant connection, someone who needs occasional solitude or who processes emotions internally before discussing them might be labeled as emotionally unavailable. But for many people, especially those with more introverted tendencies, space is essential for well-being and authentic connection. The healthy version of this involves communication about needs for space, reassurance about continued interest, and a balance between connection and autonomy. When these elements are present, periods of silence or solitude can actually strengthen a relationship rather than threaten it. Hashtag 5. Disagreeing or having conflict. Some dating advice suggests that early disagreements or conflicts are red flags indicating incompatibility, but differences in perspective are inevitable in any meaningful relationship, and the ability to navigate these differences respectfully is far more important than avoiding conflict altogether. Healthy conflict involves focusing on specific issues rather than attacking character, listening to understand rather than just to respond, seeking solutions rather than just to win, maintaining respect even during disagreement, repairing connection after difficult conversations. These skills are far more valuable for long-term relationship success than superficial harmony that avoids addressing real differences. Hashtag finding your balance, personal reflection. As we near the end of our exploration, I want to offer some questions for personal reflection that can help you find your own balance in navigating potential red flags. 1. What past relationship experiences might be influencing how you perceive warning signs? Are there specific painful experiences that have made you particularly sensitive to certain behaviors? 2. What's your typical pattern when you notice concerning behavior? Do you tend to overlook issues too readily, or do you tend to catastrophize minor concerns? 3. Which relationship values are truly non-negotiable for you, and which are preferences that could flex depending on other qualities a person brings? 4. How comfortable are you with direct communication about concerns? What support might you need to express concerns constructively? 5. What green flags are you looking for? What specific qualities or behaviors indicate someone has the capacity for a healthy, fulfilling relationship with you? These questions have no universal right answers. Your responses will be shaped by your unique experiences, values, and relationship goals. Taking time to reflect on them can help you develop a personalized approach to assessing relationship potential that goes beyond simplified red flag checklists. Hashtag moving forward with wisdom. As we conclude our exploration of relationship red flags, I want to leave you with some final thoughts on moving forward with wisdom. The goal isn't to become less discerning about potential partners, but rather to become more discerning in ways that actually serve your relationship happiness. This means developing nuanced awareness rather than rigid rules, and approaching new connections with both appropriate caution and courageous openness. Remember that every significant relationship involves risk. There are no guarantees, no matter how carefully you screen potential partners. The question isn't whether you might get hurt. If you open yourself to real connection, at some point you probably will experience disappointment or pain. The question is whether the connection offers sufficient potential for joy, growth, and meaning to make that risk worthwhile. The most meaningful relationships often begin not with perfect safety, but with the brave decision to remain open despite past hurts. To see another person clearly, their strengths and limitations, their beauty and their wounds, and to allow yourself to be seen with the same compassion and clarity. I hope this exploration helps you navigate your relationships with more clarity, compassion, and wisdom. Remember that while awareness of red flags is important for your well-being, so is remaining open to the transformative potential of connection. Thank you for watching today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these ideas resonated most with you? What has been your experience with interpreting red flags in relationships? Your insights might help others in our Soul Spark dating community on their relationship journeys. Until next time, remember that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, and from that foundation, all other connections flourish.